it felt like it's still stuff that we can do. There's still stuff that our audience still wants from us. So I don't know. I think if I would have called it quits then, I think I would have felt a little bit shortchanged.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Rubbish, and stand back for another video. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Phil Lindsey from Grapsody on Fightful. So, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, if we take this back, I alluded this to you as we were talking off camera. If we take this back, Phil, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan for people that may not know?
Uh, I discovered wrestling through magazines, I think. I think my
Mm,
first like exposure to wrestling was through WWE magazine.
mm,
If I remember correctly, I think it was a cover with Undertaker on it. It was like old school Taker with like the tie and like the purple gloves. And that was like my first thing that got me like interested in wrestling.
Was it sort of the thing where you were perusing a store and saw it, or did you seek them out?
No, I had a friend that was big into wrestling at the time, and funny enough, his grandfather was actually a mortician, and
Oh.
so he kind of had like this affinity for Undertaker just because, he grew up around like the funeral business. And so
Mm.
um he had wrestling magazines at school. And so he had him at lunch and I was like, "Yo, what is that?" And that was kind of like how I got into it. And that's kind of how we bonded as friends as well.
Mm, that's very, very cool. So you talk about when you discover it, and it's the old school taker. I'm assuming this is sort of mid 90s, like new generation era. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was like mid 90s. Yeah, it was like mid 90s.
So when you discover wrestling, are you like all in, like let's find out how we watch this and things like that?
Yeah, I used to watch Raw and everything regularly. Of course, I couldn't get my parents to buy the pay-per-view. So I would watch the weekly shows and then like I would just like ask a friend the next day after pay-per-views what happened. Like 'cause of course I couldn't see it when it happened.
Mm. So they were like almost like your what would be a version of podcasting for some people nowadays who can't watch the pay-per-view but maybe want the review, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, kind of, because my friend would kind of recap what happened on the pay-per-view, and then in the old school, if you didn't watch the pay-per-views, they didn't show you everything on the next episode of Raw. They would like flash up like those stills of what happened because they still
Mm.
want you to buy the pay-per-view.
Mm. So you talk about them flashing up the stills. Do you remember a particular I'll call them pictures, but I know what I mean. A picture that flashed up and you were like, "Oh man, I wish I'd bought this pay-per-view now."
Um, I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't think anything can do justice. Stuff like Foley getting thrown off the top of the cage and like them just kind of like running through it with the steals and him throwing getting thrown off the cage. It couldn't do it justice until you actually saw the video of him getting thrown off.
Mm, I understand what you're saying completely there. So as we move on in your fandom, do you remember the first time that you were like, "I can buy my own pay-per-view now. I'm hyped for this. Let's buy this."
I didn't start buying the pay-per-views until I got like well older, like at least into my 20s, because well, I think we all went through that phase where we stopped watching. Like I was a lapsed
Mm.
fan for a long time. And at by the time I started watching again, of course, I had my own money and I was working and everything. So it definitely I didn't start like actually buying the pay-per-views until like well into my 20s.
Did you have a particular moment? You talk about being a Labs fan. Did you have a particular moment where you were like, this isn't for me anymore. I'm going to step away. And then ultimately, what brought you back?
I don't think it was any particular moment. I think we all just kind of have that moment especially when you're like a kid and going into teenage years of where you just kind of stop watching. You just kind of fall out of contact with it. And it wasn't anything really wrong with the wrestling. I mean, there were things that I wasn't enjoying as much, like towards the beginning of like the ruthless aggression era. But I don't think that the product itself was that bad that it made me stop watching. It was just kind of like I had felt like I had kind of outgrown it. I think we all kind of had that moment where we're kind of feeling ourselves and it's
Mm,
like, oh well, I don't watch that. That's for kids. Um,
mm,
but the thing that got me back in was the pipe bomb. I
mm.
think it was Punk cutting the pipe bomb. That was the thing that got me watching again.
Why was the pipe bomb the thing that was like, I know this is a cliche question, but why was the pipe bomb the thing that you were like, okay, I'm back now for a while?
It was just cool, man. It just felt real. Before we realized, of course, that the pipe bomb was also staged as well. It just felt real, man. Like it. I had never seen a promo feel like that, feel like genuine and electric. That was just kind of thing that got me more interested. And then, like, I was a big Punk fan when I got back in, and still a big Punk fan. So I think it was just mostly the appeal of watching Punk.
I understand what you're saying completely there. So jumping forward slightly, how do you connect with originally? How do you connect with Will Washington and Righteous Rich to start Grapsody?
Um, well, I had done podcasts with Will before. I had done a post show for him with him. I believe that was Revolution. We did the post show for. Um, I think it was Revolution. It was the show with the exploding barbed wire death match.
Yeah, that was
Um,
Revolution 2021, I want to say.
yeah. So I had done the post show for RBR with Will, and we had done another podcast as well. We did the he used to call his show on Saturdays Wrestling with the Weekend. And that was just kind of
Mm,
his show that he did on his own. And we did the episode right after First Dance. Um, and that was just kind of thing like, well, and, I mean, we talked for a long time after we did the post show for RBR as well. And, I kind of, we, we had a lot of conversations that night about just being fans, being, black men that cover wrestling.
mm,
And, I told him at the time, I was like, me and Reg talk all the time in group chat. You should, and in DMs, you should, you should come through and we should, I'm sure we all have like varying stories that are very similar. And so at some point he had Reg on, Wrestling with the Weekends as well. And Reg was like, "Hey man, next time we do this, we should do it with Phil." And that was this kind of thing. And I told him before like we should podcast together at some point. And it's just one of those things where we all three of us had said it in some way enough times where it's just like, why don't we just do this?
mm. How did it feel to record that first or go live with that first episode then when you were like, ah, we've got something here?
I don't think I knew we had anything on that first episode. It was just kind of like I didn't want to podcast or start anything unless it was with those two guys.
Mm,
Um, because I mean, I had done a bunch of podcasts. I had been a guest on other people's podcasts a bunch, but I didn't have my own podcast. And I really didn't have that much interest in having my own podcast, to be honest. But when Will had pitched it to me, the idea of doing it with him, and I was like, yeah, cool. Long as Reg is in, then I'm in. And so once Reg was in, it was the three of us. And I remember when we first started putting out the images to announce it, and I was like, this is pretty cool. It's like people are actually excited to listen to the three of us together. And it wasn't so much that I think we had anything. Like I said, I don't know if I ever like thought like, oh man, we've got something cool here. It was just kind of like this is just fun to do. This is fun to record with my friends.
mm. So you talk about it being fun to record and stuff. How did you sort of make it fun, but also realize this is how we talk about stuff? I think this is a word analytically and sort of review stuff. Does that make sense?
Uh, I don't think it was a conscious effort. I think we all came with our idea of what we wanted the podcast to be.
Mm,
Um, I think we just all naturally talk a certain way to each other as friends, and I think we, for the most part, have tried to keep it. Um, we've tried to keep it casual. We've tried to keep it like natural discussion, and I
mm.
think that works. That we didn't come in with like a concerted effort to do that though. It was just kind of like the after the first few episodes, like this is what works, so let's do this.
Did you ever have a moment when, because I know we all go through this, a little bit of maybe not imposter syndrome, but a little bit of like views are down, people aren't connecting. Did you ever have a moment of like, is this worth it anymore?
I've had multiple moments where I'm just like, I don't know, man. Is this still worth spending most of my time with? It wasn't so much that the podcast wasn't enjoyable anymore because I've always enjoyed recording with the guys, but um it's sometimes the internet aspect of it can get kind of like
Mm,
tiring, just like the actually like being active online and actually like promoting it. Sometimes I'm not as interested in doing that part of it. Um I just think that the amount of wrestling that I watch, sometimes I can get burned out with just like the entire process of keeping up with certain things for the podcast. I try not to just watch things just for the sake of watching it for the podcast. But I feel like sometimes you inevitably feel like, well, I have to know what's going on here in order to talk about it.
mm. What do you do on those days that say like you'll realize, oh, you might have been to a show or something and you're like, I've done far too much wrestling this week. How do you make sure that Phil is still a wrestling fan at the end of the day? Because that's what we all are, if that makes sense.
Well, I think the big part about it is Grapsody not a review podcast. I think if Grapsody was a review podcast, I'd have a harder time with it. But because it's not like I make sure I have to watch every episode of Raw, for example. Like if I'm not enjoying Raw, I just won't watch it. And I would just, pick topics that I would prefer to talk about, pick topics of and talk about things that I am enjoying watching. I don't ever want to come on every week and talk about things that I'm not enjoying because that's not really fun to me.
So you talked about not enjoying and and things like that. How did you sort of know? Because you said, or it was either you, or was it you? It was you that broached the idea of bringing Reg on, right? When you was with Will. So how did you know that your chemistry would translate? Because we all have those buddies that are like, we're fun, we should start a podcast. How did you know your chemistry would translate into podcasting?
Um, well, I mean, we had done podcasts before. I've done podcasts on Reg's YouTube channel. And that was me and Reg and Andrew Thompson. We had done
Oh,
like
well,
maybe
acting.
four or so episodes on there. And so it wasn't so much that I thought that our chemistry would translate. It was just that, I felt like if we were going to do anything and it was going to be a podcast, I wanted to do it with my friend. And so it felt like it's a package deal. It's the three of us or not. It's the three of us or bus. So I don't know. It could have ended up sounding terribly. It could have ended up not going well at all, but it was just kind of like I want to do it with my friend.
You talk about being a package deal there, Phil, and that is a beautiful segue, my friend. How, when Will announces to you, look, guys, I've got to step away in, help me out with the dates, please, because my brain doesn't work very well. In last year? Was it? It was last year, right?
Last April.
When
Last episode was at the end of April, I think.
when he announces to you, I've got to step away. This opportunity with AEW's come about. How are you feeling in that moment?
Well, I had always figured he was gonna get some big offer from somewhere, and I mean, um, I wasn't totally shocked that he got the offer with AEW. I was very happy for him. Um, I I didn't immediately jump to, okay, what does this mean for the podcast? My immediate thought was, oh, that's great for him. I think he's gonna
Mm.
smash it. I think he's gonna be great at that. Um, like the stuff afterwards of like, all right, I don't know what this means. I don't know what this means for our podcast. I don't know if people are still as interested in listening to just me and Reg. I don't know what our dynamic is like with just the two of us. There was a lot of uncertainty with that.
You talk about there not knowing what your dynamic was. So take me back to recording the first episode without Will. How did that feel, first of all?
It was awkward. It was awkward. I think we did fine, but I think it was just it wasn't so much us getting used to talking without Will because all of that stuff is whatever. You put microphones in front of us. Even if you don't put microphones in front of us, we can sit and talk about wrestling. But it was just kind of like the back end stuff that Will did a lot of, and just kind of deciding, all right, who's going to take on this role, who's going to take on that role. And it was just kind of figuring that part out first. Um,
Mm.
and so the first episode we did, it was a little bit clunky. Like I remember um, I couldn't figure out how to cue up the theme and everything correctly at first because it wasn't I don't know. For whatever reason, I just was having a hard time with it, and that's just because I was just used to Will doing that part. He would just click the buttons and start the show, and so the first episode, I was like, I think I'm doing this right.
Mm. I understand what you're saying completely there. Obviously, to me and a lot of other people in this community, Will Washington is one of the goats when it comes to wrestling podcasts. So, what is something that you learned from him in your time of podcasting that you and Reg now take into your episodes of Grapsody?
Uh, well, I mean, clearly he's been podcasting a lot longer than I have. I still think it's crazy that he decided to stop doing a podcast that he had been doing for over a decade at that point, to do something that was completely, unproven with us
Mm,
and unproven with two guys that didn't have nearly as much podcasting experience as he did. Um, I think that was a big risk for him. It was a lot of unknowns that came with that, and I'm very grateful that he decided to, do that with us. Um, from a podcast side, what did I learn from him? I would say, I think just he has a way of expressing his opinions. Sometimes,
diplomatically?
even diplomatically is a good way to say it. In a way that, I think he is sometimes very careful about the way he phrases things. And so sometimes I've taken that from him, even if I don't think something is like lighting the world on fire is not something I absolutely love. I'll try to talk about it in a way that I can get across what I don't enjoy about it, but also not completely like trash it.
Mm. What was something that you were doing as a trio that you was like when Will's departure happened, that you were like, okay, I think we need to get rid of this now?
Um,
If there was anything.
I don't know if there's anything we've just outright gotten rid of since he's been there. I mean, um, I don't no, I don't think we've taken anything like there hasn't been anything we intentionally just stopped doing since he's not there.
Mm,
I feel like we debate less because he's not there anymore, but I feel like that's because me and Reg agree more than we disagree. I
mm,
feel like me and Will disagree the most out of the three of us, so I feel like we don't debate nearly as much as we used to.
mm. What was your biggest debate then with Will when it came to wrestling? What was the one thing you never agreed on?
Um, I mean, we didn't agree on quite a few wrestlers that I liked that he did not. He was not a big Bray Wyatt fan. And I felt like we disagreed a lot on Bray. We disagreed a lot on Seth Rollins as well. But I think our biggest debate was at one point, it was the question of if they were going to have more than one world championship with WWE. And I was always of the opinion that there kind of needed to be two because Roman's not on TV enough
Mm,
to justify having just one title. And it was just something I just couldn't ever get him to agree with me on or see the see essentially the merit of my argument that yeah, I get the point that, there should only be one world championship because the world championship is only going to feel like it's a big deal on the guy that's being pushed as the top guy. The other title is always going to feel secondary. And I always understood that point he was making, but I don't think he understood the side that I was trying to say that it without Roman being a full-time guy, without Roman being on TV enough, you need somebody else that's holding a world title, particularly on Raw, because there's a void there.
I understand what you're saying completely there. Going back to Will's departure for a second, did you and Reg ever have a conversation of like, maybe we should hang this up now? Maybe.
We never talked about hanging it up. I remember I called him after we had a conversation with Will about him leaving. And I think it was like the three of us talked like right after we recorded the episode. And I called him. I was just like, so what do you want to do?
Hmm.
What do you want to do moving forward? And he was just like, I kind of want to still do this. And I was like, yeah, I still want to do this as well. I think there was some uncertainty, like I said, about uh would would there still be as much interest in listening to us? We didn't know what our fan base looked like without Will. Um, but I don't think we ever had the thought like, oh, we're just definitely gonna close the door on this. I think we both felt like there was still some stuff we wanted to do. We weren't ready to no longer podcast together. Um, I don't know. It never felt like we're done here. And I've even talked to Will, and I feel like Will has never felt like I'm done here.
Mm. So you talked about Will not being done. There was an episode of Grapsody, basically where you guys interviewed him, not long after his departure. If correct me if I'm wrong on that. Again, my brain does not work very well with dates, but do you know what I mean? How did that feel to
Yeah.
get the trio back together?
Yeah, he did the episode during Double or Nothing weekend, when we were all in Vegas.
Mm,
Um, and we wanted to have him on specifically like right after the Nuggets won the championship because he's a big Denver Nuggets fan.
mm,
Um, and it was funny because I'm used to him leading the conversation in some ways because he was our A Mike. And so it was interesting leading the conversation. And there's certain things that we've done with him not being there. And it was funny catching him off guard with certain inside jokes that we've made without him being there and him kind of being the first to see it, like react to it on screen and not telling him about it before we record it. Um, but yeah, we've done that episode. He also did the Starcast episode with us too.
mm. I understand completely there. So did it feel almost like our boy's home? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy podcasting with him again?
Um, I, it was fun to record with him again. Um, but it did feel like I don't know, it just feels like sometimes things have changed and not in a bad way. It just feels like, all right, well, it's we can't have the same dynamic that we did because it just, some things just have changed. And I think how do I put this? It was fun to have him on. It was fun doing Starcast with him. And I always will enjoy podcasting with him, but you can tell with just how his knowledge of wrestling has changed, how his experience around wrestling has changed with where he works and his role over there. You could just tell it's just certain things that are not exactly the same. But like I said, it's always enjoyable talking wrestling with him.
Mm. So I have a bit of a self-indulgent question once we've done this after that. But I have two questions for you, Phil, which is If you did wrap up after the Will's departure, would you have viewed Grapsody and your career as a success? And then what would you have wanted your legacy to be?
I don't know if I have a legacy. Um, I think if we had called it after Will left, I think I would have felt like we accomplished a lot in 2 years. There are certain things that I notice from afar that I can see like that is our influence. And I mean there's things that I feel like we did that I still, I still can't fathom that we managed to do that in just 2 years. So I would have thought it was a success, but I still think that there was just so much that I still wanted to do. Like if like now thinking about rapping after Will left and not like doing the DNA interview. Like that was an episode that me and Reg were really proud of. Um
Mm,
that was a goal of ours to have somebody from hip hop on the podcast. And so just thinking about like calling it quits and not getting that episode, it would have felt like a missed opportunity. It felt like it's still stuff that we can do. There's still stuff that our audience still wants from us. So I don't know. I think if I would have called it quits then, I think I would have felt a little bit shortchanged.
mm. I know what you mean. And then you don't really think you have a legacy, no?
I don't know. I think it feels a little self-aggrandizing to say, "Oh, I have a legacy." I mean, I think it's great that people enjoy the podcast. I think it's great that we've had an impact on people. I think it's great that people think we've had an impact on this space. But I always try to keep things in context that, a lot of this is just us, getting on a podcast and shooting the shit. And it's cool. It's cool. It's fun. I like that people enjoy it, but I also don't want to I don't want to overdo it, man. I don't want to over congratulate myself, you know.
I know what you mean completely there. So before we do a segment, which I actually cannot remember if we did it last time, should have watched our last interview back, but, called Generic Questions before we wrap this up. A self-indulgent question I have: as someone that does interviews on Grapsody, where can I improve and things like that?
Where can you improve on interviews? I don't know, man, because I think it's hard to tell somebody how to find their own voice in an interview. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like, because I think everybody has to find their own, comfort zone with the kind of questions they ask and the way that they want to present it. I think for me, I like to try and keep the interview as conversational as possible because it makes it easier for the audience to listen to.
mm,
Um, but I think you just have to find what works for you. I think you have to find um the right the right voice that you want for your interviews, the right, tone you want to strike for these. And it seems like you do. And so I just think, I mean, the best advice I can give you is to, just keep grinding at it and keep getting comfortable with interviewing people.
mm. That's very, very cool, my friend. So quickly, as we wrap this up, because based on that phone call, I can see a door knock happening soon, and I do apologize for that. That's very unprofessional. We are going to do a quick segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this. Where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay per view, favorite wrestler's entrance theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. So basically, the questions I feel Phil might be asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
Favorite match of all time. That is very, very tough. Um, I don't know if it's my favorite match of all time, but it's a match that I go back to quite often. And just given who, some of my favorite wrestlers are, I would say it's up there with one of my favorite. The Punk versus Bryan Over the Limit. That's
Oh
a
yeah,
match I go back to a lot. It's probably one of my favorite matches both of those guys have had. I don't know if it's my favorite match of all time, but if you hold my arm to the fire, that's I guess that's my answer.
What about your favorite pay-per-view card, such as Double or Nothing 2019?
Uh, I think my favorite pay-per-view of all time is uh probably All Out 2021.
Hmm? Why does that one speak
That
to you
that's
as
the
a
All
fan?
Out. That's the All Out where Punk had his first match with AEW. I think that's 2021, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Um but yeah, that's it's Punk's pay-per-view debut. That's where Bryan debuted. It's where Cole debuted. Um I think uh I think the main event is very, very underrated. There aren't
Oh,
many
I
matches
agree.
on that card that I don't really care for. Like the only match I can think about on that card that didn't like blow me away is of course like the Paul White match with QT
And
Marshall.
even
But
that's
most of
fun.
that, most yeah, even that's a fun match for what it is. But just I think start to finish is just a great pay-per-view. Young Bucks versus Lucha Bros is fantastic. I think Chris Statlander versus Britt Baker is also incredible match. Probably the best match of Britt's run as champion. Darby versus Punk is really, really good. Um, yeah, yeah, I would say that's my favorite pay-per-view.
What about your favorite theme song?
Favorite theme song. Uh That's kind of a cheat because it's licensed music, but I'm gonna go with Cult of Personality. Even though I am a big fan of Fire Burns as well, I know some punk fans are not as big of fans of Fire Burns, but it's just one of those that I have a lot of memories with, like seeing him come out at Money in the Bank 2011 to Fire Burns in Chicago. It's like burned in my memory now. Um,
Was you
no pun
there?
intended. I was not there, but I was not there.
Ah, fair enough. What about your favorite tag team?
Favorite tag team. The New Day.
I can guess why, but why do they speak to you as a fan?
Um, I just think like their body of work, their all-time great tag team. I think what they represent as well. I really like. It's not just the fact that they are just genuine and they're themselves and they're different. I feel like they bring such a different dynamic to wrestling as black wrestlers. But I just love their camaraderie. I love that for most of their time together, their friendship has been the draw. They've never been like we're gonna split up and go and be singles wrestlers. Like we're
Mm,
friends no matter what. Like it's always about the three of us. Even if one of us is succeeding, all of us succeed.
that's very, very cool. And then as we wrap this up, Reg, who is your favorite wrestler of all time?
Favorite wrestler of all time. Man. Very tough. I was a big Macho Man fan. But I'm gonna say The Rock. Rock growing up was my favorite wrestler.
That's very, very cool. Then, as we wrap this up, Reg, the question I end this show on is I believe, as people with social media, podcasters, YouTubers, etc., we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of very good way, if you think about the word. So, what is one piece of content you're like, I'd like to be remembered for that? Then, what is one that you're like, yuck, please forget about that?
Um, Piece of content that I would like to be remembered for. Um, uh, I would say there's an article I did for Bleacher Report maybe 2 years ago at this point, and it was is who is the biggest superstar in wrestling right now? Roman or Kenny Omega? It's like right in the middle of Kenny Omega's title run. And it's probably one of my favorite things I've written for Bleacher Report. So I'll say I like to be remembered for that. Something that I would like people to totally forget. Um, I don't know if I have anything. I might have written something somewhere that I was not the biggest fan of, but nothing off the top of my head.
That's very, very cool, Reg. So as we wrap this up, obviously I want to say thank you for another great conversation. But please promote yourself. Where can the good people find you, your work, etc.?
You can find me on Twitter at PhilDL616. You can find me on Fightful's YouTube channel hosting Grapsody every Saturday at noon. It's Righteous Reg. We also do Ask Grapsody on Fightful Select every other Thursday at 5 Eastern time. Almost at 4. It's those time zones, man. It's tricky.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and you can also find my writing at Bleacher Report.
It's well worth doing, guys. Not only one of probably the hardest working people in this space, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Irish on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter or X at Tom Talks Irish, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.